In this video, I'll walk you through the 18 most common FP&A interview questions, explain why they're being asked, and show you exactly how to best answer them to stand out from other candidates and land the job. As an FP&A leader with over a decade of experience, I've been on both sides of the interview table many times. So I know exactly what hiring managers are looking for when they're interviewing for FP&A roles. Let's dive in. Let's start with the process. Most FP&A interview processes include 5 distinct phases. First is the resume selection. That's where HR reviews your application to make sure you have the basic qualifications. They'll check for things like your degree and your years of experience. And here it's important that you write your resume in a way that it's optimized for humans, so HR, recruiters, but then also for bots, because often this resume selection phase in the process is taken over by algorithms who look for the right keywords. The next step in the interview process is the screening interview. That's the initial tick the box call with HR to confirm you do have the minimum requirements. Then they'll ask you questions that are closely linked to your resume. So they'll ask you to walk you through your experience to confirm that you have in terms of experience on your resume. But that's it. You shouldn't expect more than that. And then the third phase is the business partner / peer interview. Now you'll be meeting with potential colleagues to assess team fit. And here you can expect a more wide-ranging interview where your future colleagues will ask you questions about your background, your experiences, your skills, but also what you are planning to do in your career. And you might also get personal questions to see whether you could be a good fit with the corporate culture and with the team specifically. Next in the process is the case study. That's where you do a hands-on Excel or a presentation exercise to demonstrate your technical skills. Typically, that means that first you have to do some research and then use that research to populate a financial model, or the company will send you already a pre-populated financial model in Excel and you have to do something with it, you have to complete it, you have to build on top of it. And then usually the second step of the case study is that you have to present your findings back to the hiring manager. And that's to show that you have both the technical skills and the ability to tell the story behind the numbers in a way that people even without a finance background understand, which is a common task in FP&A. And then lastly, you have the hiring manager interviews. So those are in-depth discussions with your potential boss about your experience and the fit for your role. Typically, companies do more than one of these. You would be talking to your direct manager, but then often you would also be talking to either other managers in the company or to the line manager of your manager. And that's to make sure that, you have the experience that you claim you have and to assess, the depth of your skills. And so today we're going to focus on preparing for the hiring manager interviews where the real decision making happens. The most common question that you get right at the beginning of the job interview is, please tell me about yourself. Why do they ask this? Interviewers want to place your resume in context. They want to see how you communicate and understand what drives you professionally. Now, how should you approach this question? Begin with a quick overview of your career journey, focusing on roles and achievements that are most relevant to FP&A. Then select 1 or 2 significant achievements that demonstrate your abilities as an FP&A professional. If you like, you can briefly mention also aspects outside of work that make you unique. However, that's optional. And this is not optional. Conclude with why you're excited about this specific opportunity. Now, what are hiring managers listening for here? How should you approach this? The most important thing is that you keep it structured and concise. This should not be longer than 2 or 3 minutes. And hiring managers, when they're listening for answers, they're looking for red flags, right? And the red flag with this question of, please tell me about yourself, is that someone rambles, someone keeps talking and talking in circles, talking in a way that's not structured. And that's a significant red flag. Another common question you get at the beginning of the interview is, what do you know about this this organization? Hiring managers ask this question because they want to assess how much effort you've put into researching the company and whether you understand the industry they are operating in. So when you go about answering this, summarize the key information about the company, including mission, vision, product services, market position, recent news, and briefly touch on the industry, competitors, trends, and challenges, and mention specific achievements or challenges the company has faced recently. And of course, here also you want to make sure that you explain how your skills and experience align with their needs and goals, and show genuine enthusiasm for what the company represents. Now, how can you go about preparing for this question? Well, start by going to the company's website. That's always a good starting point because often they clearly showcase, their products, their services, their mission, their vision. And then as the next step, I would recommend, if the company you're applying to is public, look at their investor relations websites and go through the presentations there about that company leaders gave to Wall Street analysts. You'll find a lot of information there that you don't find anywhere else. And if the company you're applying to is not public, I would still recommend to look at competitor in the space, a direct competitor who is public, and go through the investor relations presentations, or even listen in to the recording of the quarterly calls that public companies share when they talk to Wall Street analysts. And then lastly, use your favorite AI tool. Open up ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Copilot, and ask it to summarize what this company does, recent news in the company, what competitors are doing, what challenges are happening in the industry. Of course, make sure you also ask your AI chatbot to include the relevant sources and links so you can quickly check whether what it's telling you is actually accurate. That's super important when we work in AI, but AI can be a fantastic starting point for your research on the company in the industry. Next is a tricky question. Why do you want to work for this organization? Well, this is very similar to the question we covered just before. What do you know about this organization? Just put differently. Because what hiring managers want to hear here is also if you deeply understand the company's culture and values and whether these resonate with you. You demonstrate your understanding of the company by mentioning specific aspects that stand out to you. You explain why these aspects appeal to you, and then link your career aspiration with what the company offers. And then ideally you pivot to what you can offer to the company. Very important here. Use every opportunity you have to show how much value you can bring to the table, and do that enthusiastically and with genuine interest. And getting to a point where you can genuinely show interest requires that you do your homework, you do your research, you go ahead and find things that excite you about that opportunity. And if you can't do that, then maybe this particular job opportunity isn't for you. Another common question at the beginning of the interview is, why do you want to transition into FP&A? They ask this because they want to gauge your motivation and whether you clearly understand what the role entails. Here you start with why you're passionate about FP&A. What excites you about this role? Is it more the technical aspects, or is it the interpersonal aspects, business partnering, influencing, telling the financial story of the business? For me personally, it's the combination of the two. Sometimes being able to just work on a spreadsheet, build a financial model that makes a concrete recommendation about how to move the company forward. But then on the next day, talking to my business partners to understand how can I help them reach their goals and how can I help them make better decisions. That interplay of numbers and people is what makes me passionate about FP&A, and the variety that brings to the work. But you have to figure out what you're passionate about. And then connect your past experience and skills to the skills needed in FP&A, and show that you understand what FP&A entails and why it's important for the business. Feel free to take a look at my recent video where I explain what FP&A is all about. might be a good preparation for this question. And then clearly articulate how transitioning to FP&A fits into your career objectives. If possible, tailor your answer to reflect the company's specific needs or challenges. By the way, if you're serious about landing your FP&A dream job, then make sure you click the first link in the description to get my online course, Creating a Standout FP&A Resume, completely for free. In it, you'll learn how to write a resume that ensures you stand out in recruiters' eyes, even if you have never worked in FP&A. Now back to the video. Once the opening questions of the interview are done, interviewers typically dive into your technical skills and your experience. So the fifth question is, can you share an example of a financial report that was particularly difficult to put together? I loved asking this question when I interviewed FP&A job candidates. Here, the hiring manager wants to understand your experience with financial modeling, analysis, and how meticulous you are with your work. And specifically, they also want to understand what is difficult for you. What example are you using here, and how difficult is that actually? That tells us something about your level of experience with financial models. So you need to think carefully about which scenario you pick here. This is something that you want to prepare ahead of time for an interview, just in case a question like this comes up. So pick a scenario that showcases your technical skills and your soft skills, and a financial model that was definitely on the challenging side. You don't want to bring one here that is too easy, because we want to really go deep here. Then set the scene by explaining why the report was necessary and what made it challenging, and then detail the steps you took to overcome the challenges. Be clear about your specific role in the process. That's also a common mistake that I see here, is that people talk about what the company then was able to achieve based on the model. But if you weren't involved in that part, then it doesn't make sense to list it here, because we want to hear, what you have done specifically. So detail what you did, then share the outcome and the impact of your work, and also briefly reflect on what you learned. And be prepared for follow-up questions. So here the interviewer will ask specifically about different aspects of the model to learn more about how did it work and what made it difficult and what made it challenging. Can you tell me about the time your forecast directly impacted a major decision? That's another common question we get when it comes to experience. And the interviewer here wants to understand the direct impact your work has had and how you translate financial insights into actionable strategies. So we want to see, when you did a forecast, was the forecast at a level of detail that it actually allowed leaders to make different decisions? And if not, that maybe the forecasting you've done previously was too shallow. So select an instance where your forecast had a clear and ideally also measurable impact. Set the stage with context about the business challenge or opportunity, and then discuss your forecasting approach. Which forecasting techniques did you use and what were your data sources? And then describe the decision influenced by your forecast. And don't forget to report on the results using specific metrics. The more you can quantify things here, the better. What is your process for identifying risks and opportunities? It's another question I love to ask, because as identifying risks and opportunities is one of the ways that you can really add value, that you can really move the needle in your FP&A role. So hiring managers want to hire people who have experience in doing that. And that's also a great way to probe your ability to think analytically and strategically about the business. So when you're faced with this question, begin by outlining your general approach or philosophy when it comes to financial analysis and variance analysis specifically. So comparing actual results to the forecast, to the budget, and to the prior year. Then detail specific methods and tools you use for analysis and trend monitoring, and describe how you assess and prioritize risks and opportunities. Because it's not just about identifying what a risk and opportunity is, we also need to quantify it. And then try to provide a specific example that illustrates the process in action. That's another thing you have to prepare ahead of time for these interviews. So make a list of specific examples of things you're proud of in the space of analysis, so that when you get this question, you are prepared. What's your approach for building financial models from scratch in Excel? Another one of my favorite questions that is incredibly helpful in differentiating successful candidates from those where the role isn't a good fit, because we can use this question to assess your technical skills in Excel and financial modeling and how you approach model construction strategically. So to answer this, discuss how you define the model's objectives. Also always good to take a step back and start with objectives, and then mention how you collaborate with stakeholders to understand their inputs they're giving you, because financial modeling is not just about what you're doing in Excel, it's also how you're making sure that the inputs that different stakeholders give you are accurate and challenged and understood. And then explain how you set up your spreadsheets, which formulas you use, how you make sure that you keep your formulas simple, and how you set up the model so that it's optimized for fast iteration on the one hand, so that you can quickly make changes and you can answer questions on the spot, but then at the same time that your model is built for robustness and making sure that the surface area for mistakes is as small as possible, because everyone makes mistakes in Excel, but what differentiates a rockstar FP&A analyst from an average one is that the rockstar analyst knows how to find their mistakes before they hit submit. So make sure you cover that when you talk about financial model building, and then also make sure that you touch on how you make your models user-friendly and maintainable. And lastly, don't forget to explain how you document your inputs. Super important. Let's assume a junior finance employee asks you for advice about getting better at presenting the financials. What advice would you give them? So this question helps assess your ability to mentor less experienced team members and your understanding of effective communication techniques and presentation techniques. So it does two things in one. As an interviewer, I always like those questions. Here I want to start by talking about the importance of clarity and simplicity. Suggest framing financial data within a narrative that connects to business goals. Recommend focusing on the metrics that matter most to the audience. Advise on using visuals. Stress the importance of practicing your presentations, and emphasize preparing for potential questions. Now, ideally brainstorm those questions ahead of time and offer to provide feedback on, the junior employees' drafts. With the experience-related questions out of the way, next we cover problem-solving and analysis questions. Imagine you're in charge of controlling the R&D expense budget. Your analysis shows that your R&D business partner should need 10 million until the end of the year. However, the forecast shows they need $15 million. How do you address this situation? So this is a typical situation where your business partner all of a sudden changes their forecast and says they need more money than they originally said they needed. So how do you approach this? Well, you want to explore how you approach resolving differences between your analysis and the others. So this is more about the interpersonal skills. So to approach this, first ensure your analysis is accurate and up to date. Then set up a meeting with your colleague to better understand their point of view and where they are coming from. Then present your analysis clearly, highlight the reasons for your forecast, use a data-based approach, explore the reasons for the discrepancy, make sure that you're listening more than you're speaking. You want to make sure that the other person feels heard and you really understand where they are coming from. And then you work together to identify priorities that align with company goals. Imagine you're asked to build a financial model for the launch of a new ice cream SKU. Your model shows it has a projected profit margin of 0. What do you do? Well, here the hiring manager wants to see how you respond to challenging outcomes in your financial model. How to approach this? Well, confirm that the inputs are realistic, work with the cross-functional team to see how optimizing cost or enhancing value propositions fix the issue, evaluate the project strategic goals beyond the immediate financial returns it would bring, because sometimes even if the profit margin is 0, it might still be a good idea to move forward with the model if there are other more long-term benefits that the model maybe couldn't consider, like sustainability impact or impact on employee morale. And then prepare a recommendation based on your analysis, and make sure you also cover setting up a monitoring process if the decision is made to proceed, where you track the project, and maybe you suggest that you track a project that is so close to not being financially viable even more closely. In addition to those technical questions, you likely also face questions about how well you manage your time and prioritize, because that's such an important part of any FP&A role. Can you tell me about a time when you were asked to complete several tasks at the same time against tight deadlines? Also one of my favorite questions. Here the hiring manager wants to probe your ability to manage your time under pressure and your organizational strategies. So to approach this, start by setting the context, by explaining the tasks and timelines, detail how you evaluated the urgency and importance of each task, how you confirmed that this actually is urgent and important, right? Then you share specific time management strategies you used, perhaps use the Eisenhower matrix. You can look that up, how that works. And then importantly, emphasize your communication with stakeholders. So how you kept them up to date about your progress and how you were prioritizing the different tasks. Now, this is a question that's a bit more challenging to answer. What would you have done if you were unable to complete a task by the deadline? Why does the interviewer ask this? Well, they want to determine if you understand the importance of communicating early when a deadline is at risk, and how you deal with the fact that sometimes, we can't meet every deadline. So how do you approach this? You acknowledge the situation early. You describe how you would communicate with stakeholders. You highlight the importance of transparency about the reasons for the delay, and you discuss how you would propose potential solutions. For example, that might include seeking input from other people, and emphasize taking responsibility and learning from the experience if it really was the case that you couldn't meet the deadline, and explain how you would prevent it in the future. The next topic interviewers cover is interpersonal skills and teamwork. So a frequently asked question here is, can you tell me about a time when you had to work with someone who was very demanding? That's a question that gets asked because interviewer wants to assess how you handle potential conflict and high pressure interactions, which can be part of any FP&A role. So here you want to make sure you briefly describe the situation, avoid any negative language, show your efforts to understand their perspective and needs, describe your strategies for managing the relationship, focus on positive outcomes of your approach, and share insights or skills gained from the experience. Now, the most important aspect of this question is how you make sure you understood what they needed. That's how you explain what made it demanding, and then again focusing on communication and be very clear about what you can and cannot do. Can you tell me about a time when you made a recommendation that led to improved efficiency or increased profitability? We ask this question because we want to hear whether candidates have done something that made a difference in the business, right? That really moved the needle. And we want to assess your ability to identify opportunities for improvement and effectively implement them. That's another one of those where it really pays off to think about a good example beforehand. So how do you answer this? Choose a situation with a clear positive impact, ideally something that's measurable. Detail your process. Don't just talk about the result, talk about how you got there. Clearly explain your recommendation. Mention challenges when implementing it, if there were any, and how you overcame them. That can make your story even more powerful. And focus on quantifiable outcomes and share any lessons learned. What's your approach to building professional relationships with your business partners? That's a question that is especially important if you're applying to a role that has business partnering as part of the job description. These days, that's most of the FP&A roles. So here we want to gauge your ability to establish and maintain effective working relationships. So explain how understanding others' needs is crucial. Describe how you make sure you always communicate clearly. Explain how you tailor your approach to the individuals. Mention techniques for showing empathy, and stress the importance of being reliable and consistent. And of course, discuss how you continuously improve your relationship building skills. This is a question where you really want to share an example rather than just talking in the abstract, because anyone can talk about how they are great team players and great at building relationships. But if you can share a story of where building a professional relationship was essential, to reach your goals, to help your business partner reach their goals, that can make that much, much more believable and much more powerful. And the last topic you face in FP&A interviews is questions around self-assessment and continuous learning. And so a question that can be challenging to answer if you're not prepared for it is, what would you say is a development area of yours? We ask this because we want to gauge how you assess your own skills and how you look at your own skills critically and see if you're actively working on improvement. So the key here is, and this is absolutely critical, pick a genuine area you're working on improving. Don't come up with something like, oh, I'm impatient, or I'm always setting myself such high standards. It has to be a real area that you're working on, but of course, avoid choosing something that would disqualify you from the job. So be specific about how this area has manifested in your work, and then talk about steps you've taken to improve. That's the key here. Talk about what you have done, how you've learned from this, and then explain the progress you've already made and try to frame it positively. Of course, say what you're working on, but then focus on growth and learning. What have you done to improve your knowledge in the last year? We ask this question because we want to assess your dedication to self-improvement and professional development. We want to hire people who are constantly working on developing themselves, who enjoy learning new things. So share specific examples of how you learn, mention courses, certifications, books, or even educational YouTube channels. Link these activities to your career goals and the job requirements. That's important because you want to bring examples that directly apply to the job you're interviewing for. And then discuss your takeaways from your learning. Don't spend too much time here. Again, it's so important that you communicate all your answers in a structured and concise way, but pick a few takeaways from your learning and describe how you've applied them, and end answering this question with mentioning your plans for future learning. So these are the 18 most common FP&A interview questions you're likely to face and exactly how to approach them. Now, if you're looking to land your FP&A dream job, then click the first link in the description and get my free FP&A resume writing course. It gives you everything you need to maximize the chances of recruiters acting on your application. So again, click the first link below to get my Creating a Standout FP&A resume course for free. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.